Hi guys, today we're going to kind of do some follow-up work on our upper body discussions and specifically some of the work that we were just doing on our activity days in the last couple of videos. And so there's a few tangents, not a very straight line topic on today's discussion, but here we go. Okay, so to those movements that we're really going to want to make sure that we've got a coaching eye on, that we're practicing and we know our way around, are the push-up and the bench press. And a couple of reasons why is, one, that push-up, we can do it anywhere, anytime. So it's kind of common and real popular, but also it's a great movement, something that's going to develop strength from your head to your toe. You're using all those muscles. You're going to be able to cultivate some core stability. And, there's just the safety factor. If you ever fall, you might fall in that push-up position and just things like that. So the list goes on and on for why that push-up might be beneficial. As far as the bench press, again, the bench press is not that important, not that great of a movement. Outstanding for developing arm strength and developing some musculature, but not that relevant to a lot of our athletes. But it is popular. It's kind of fun to do, so we want to make sure that we know our way around it, that we can coach it, and that we can help keep people safe as they're going through it. So let's go through some common errors of the push-up. I'd say number one thing I see is that core gets sloppy. People, they just don't realize that their hips are sagging down. They look like a rotten banana. So talking to them about how to brace the core. However you want to brace the core, that's something that you want to kind of build into your programming ahead of time. For me, two of the easiest ways to get that core braced, we're going to talk about having a tight belly and a tight butt. And I might relate it to the way that we organize our spine when we have a heavy bar on our back, is that neutral tight position is going to be how we are going to organize our spine in a lot of other positions. You guys are going to see that today, is that a lot of our coaching cues and our issue areas are going to carry over from one area to the next. So something like teaching people how to brace the core is going to be super beneficial, because it's not just going to take place in push-ups, it's going to take place over and over and over again. So wide elbows. Now, why are wide elbows a problem on the bench press, or pardon me, on the push-up? Sometimes that kind of feeds into additional shoulder impingement. And you also want to know why you're doing the push-up. If you're doing the push-up to help maybe grow the chest or stress the shoulders, yeah, wider grip and wider elbows are going to accomplish that. But if you're looking for pec development, some chest flies might suit you better. If you're looking for shoulder development, some lateral raises or incline work might help you achieve that goal better. So if I'm looking for push-ups, for me personally, I like to address a little bit of all those muscles in the upper body, but I like to stress the tricep first and foremost. And then you also get some additional benefits of the rest of the upper body muscles working in the pecs, the shoulders, maybe some back work in there as a stabilizer. And then that core is going to get some work too if their athletes are performing the push-up correctly. And also you can integrate the push-up into it can be part of a circuit. It can be some conditioning. We can use it for a bunch of different reasons. And so, just one of the easiest ways is just to talk about hinging those elbows in, bring those elbows in, and that'll solve your problem. And then also look for short range of motion. Now for me, I always grew up doing push-ups with my chest to the floor. And for some athletes, that's how I still coach it. But when I'm performing push-ups, if my shoulders have days where they're not feeling very mobile, or I haven't warmed up long enough, sometimes going down chest to floor for me is not comfortable. So I'll shrink my range of motion that day, and that's all right. But I always go all the way up to the top, because if I'm trying to stress my triceps, I want to finish my range of motion and be able to really engage and flex those triceps at the top. So know your population and know your range of motion ahead of time. If you want people going chest to floor on their push-ups, then you should have a standard and and basically demand that. Now, if you should also investigate, hey, you're not going chest to floor. Is your shoulder bothering you? What's going on? Do you feel like if you go chest to floor, you won't be able to make it back up? So not every individual will always fit our standards, but that gives us time to investigate and to look into why not, what's going on with them. So whether or not you're going chest to floor, know how deep you want your athletes going on your push-ups, and challenge them to go at full range of motion. And then on the way up, if you're going for tricep development, like I often am, just know what you want. Get a full range of motion, control those reps. Or if you're not too worried about it, that's not common error for you. On the bench press, I would say loose legs. So people will be straining and their knees will be flopping around and their feet will be almost like tap dancing. Well, that tells us that the feet are not planted and that the body's not tight from feet to hands. And we want the bench press, when we do it, we want it to be a full body exercise with tightness, having the body like a statue and the arms moving up and down. Another common error would be the hips lifting. So this is a good indication that the feet are actually planted in the ground. But it's just a bad indication of what's actually going on in the core and core stability. So a lot of times those hips will pop up. And why do they pop up? Well, probably because as our hips elevate, we're turning a flat bench press into a decline bench press. And a decline bench press is easier than a flat bench press. We have more shoulder stability and there's a shorter range of motion for the bar to travel. So it's not always a conscious decision, but just something that our lifters naturally do to kind of cheat their way up. So it's just very natural, and you just tell them to brace the core. And you can talk about points of contact, feet on the ground, glutes on the bench, shoulder blades on the bench, and those are your points of contact. So, and then opening shoulder blades. So as that lifter is letting the bar come down, a lot of times their upper back will have no tightness to it. Because remember, we want to pinch our shoulder blades and set those before we take the bar out of the rack, before we're loaded. And we want to maintain that tightness all the way down. And if we were able to maintain that tightness all the way down, that gives a solid foundation for us to press out of. And why do the shoulder blades open up, or what's one way to help keep them tight? It's not to actually just think about lowering the bar, but actually think about pulling the bar down to you. All right, here we go with our barbell overhead press and our landmine press. Barbell overhead press, a lot of times our lifters or ourselves, we lean back. And why do we lean back? Well, we're taking the path of least resistance, because an overhead press is going to challenge shoulder mobility, and the muscles that it's challenging are weaker than the muscles when we lean back. So we've got these big old pec muscles here, and they're not doing very much of anything in a true overhead press when that bicep's coming up by the ear. But when we start leaning back, now we get to start firing these pec muscles, and it makes the weight lighter and makes it easier. So I talk about bracing the core. And again, one of the things that you'll see is that on a lifter who is in the middle of a set of several reps of overhead pressing, as they start fatiguing, you will start to see them lean back a little bit. And one of the best things we can do is just get in their ear to tighten up the glutes and the gut, the belly and the butt, the abs and the glutes. And when they re-solidify that foundation, all of a sudden that next rep is actually kind of crisp again. So you can help them kind of rebuild that foundation in the middle of a set, and they'll actually a lot of times perform some extra reps for you. Overuse of the legs. So tight legs, not necessarily locked out. We don't want to lock out, but we also don't want our athletes turning. If you want to be a strict press, we don't want to use legs. Now you have push presses and jerks, which use the legs, and that's fine. But if we don't want the legs being used, we need to control that. So just tell them to have tight legs. So maybe to unlock the knee or to have a loose knee, but the legs tight. So, and then our next one would be crashing down. That shoulder mobility for a lot of individuals, to take a barbell down to the front of the shoulders and back up with it being entirely on muscle tension, it's a tough spot. That's a big demand on range of motion, and especially as our athletes get older, that becomes tougher and tougher. So just having that weight, they might have it under control to here, and then they're going to crash down the last couple inches. That's super common. So just talking to them about constant control, and if they can't control those last 2-3 inches, maybe they don't need to be doing a full range of motion, from shoulder socket to arms extended. Maybe that range of motion needs to be from their chin and up, or from their nose and up. So it's okay to have standards, but if you want to make sure your athletes are safely navigating your standards. And then how about that landmine press? Let's look at the overuse of legs. Again, tight legs, and you got a little bit of a different stance there. So it opens up some different opportunities from the barbell overhead press, but a similar cue is probably going to get the job done. And then rotation. So our legs can basically stay in the same position, but we can activate our hips and we can rotate with that movement. And that actually makes it quite a bit easier. So if that bar comes down at me heavy, what I might do is rotate away from it and then build a little bit of momentum to send it back out. And we don't want to rotate. That landmine press, if done correctly, it might be one of the big gut busters that you're going to do in a weight room. When I'm going heavy on a landmine press and I'm going slow and controlled on the way down, a few reps in, one of the things that is talking to me the most is my gut. My abdomen is bracing extremely hard. The challenge is there for sure. And then again, crashing down. So crashing down with the landmine press, your shoulder mobility is not as much of a factor as it is on a barbell overhead press. But if you notice some crashing, it's probably not as much on shoulder mobility as it is on just discipline and knowing any tempos or any control on the set. So I think you're going to see a similar problem, but I think the problem has a sort of a different cause. And then we haven't mentioned the dumbbell overhead presses or dumbbell variations, but the dumbbells allow for more shoulder freedom. There's more degrees of freedom. So a shoulder that is pivoted or is in a little bit more of a neutral position, that glenohumeral joint right there is going to be a lot happier. That labrum that sits on that humeral head is going to be a lot freer to work naturally. Whereas individuals who are starting to pick up little labral tears and things like that, the barbell overhead press is going to challenge that more and more. It's going to make it a little bit harder as coaches or as lifters to successfully navigate that activity pain-free or with constant muscle tension. So that's why dumbbells and the landmine press are often superior. On the downside, you may not be handling as much weight, and it's not as cool looking or whatever, but I would encourage you guys to heavily consider predominantly pressing with a landmine variation or with dumbbells. How about our upper body pulls? And start with the horizontal pair, the bent over row and the inverted row. These are both going to be fairly popular, and some of the reasons that they're going to be beneficial or superior would be that bent over row is going to challenge your core and your posterior chain. So the glutes and hamstrings get in the game a little bit. And this is good because that's more athletic. That's going to be something that's going to be carry over into competition a little bit more for our athletes. And also just for general population, if they want to lose fat, well, building up your glutes and your hamstrings are some muscles that it's not going to hurt to build those up and to help build your base of your basal metabolic rate on everyday calorie usage. So we like our bent over rows, and it's also sort of an instant check for low back pain or core issues. So if you try to get somebody in position with a really light weight and on that bent over row, and they say, ouch, basically this is uncomfortable, or I'm really hurting on that, you instantly know that you probably need to take a step back and work on something else, whether it be mobility or sending them to the doctor, or just investigating that lower back a little bit more. So instantly, it's not only an exercise, but it's also sort of a clearance test at the same time. And that inverted row is great because we're getting extra core work. We can do it anywhere. We can do it on TRX straps or blast straps or just a barbell. So it's very space and equipment friendly. And it's also just a good movement. For all the push-ups that we've probably done in our life, we probably have a pretty severe push-pull ratio in favor of the push. And so those inverted rows, we could start to kind of add in some extra rowing just by throwing people under a strap or a bar on a regular occasion to get some rowing done. And it's also very easy to moderate and scale. So with the pull-up, not everybody is able to do pull-ups, and they might be an excellent athlete, but that part of their being an athlete might mean that they are very heavy, and inversely, it might mean that they're extremely light. So that inverted row, not everybody can do pull-ups, but pretty much everybody can do inverted rows, whether it's a tabletop row with the legs bent, or bending or straightening the legs and doing a regular inverted row. So that's why these two movements are good to keep in your toolbox. With that bent over row, when people get tired or when they just don't know exactly what we're looking for, a lot of times they will just start to stand up quite a bit. And speaking from experience, you don't always want to be yelling across a weight room to tell people to bend over. So even though that's kind of what, that's basically what you need them to do, is to bend over, what you really need them to do is to push their hips back and to lower their chest. So just saying, hey, hips back or chest down. And when you tell them that, because if they were to really just bend over, oftentimes that's just going to stress the lower back more, whereas the hips coming back is going to help load the posterior chain of the glutes and the hamstrings a little bit. And having the chest come down is going to help them get in position, as well as any other cue that I've really experienced. And fake range of motion. Fake range of motion on the bent over row, I would say, is just sort of bouncing and doing like a little back extension from the bottom to get the weight up. And also and that's on the bottom side. And then on the top side, a lot of times individuals will kind of row to their armpit or row to the nipples or chest. Well, a lot of times that means that we're actually doing a little bit of a bicep curl and just reeling it in and shortening our biceps. Whereas our concern would be more along the lines of the shoulder blades and the scapular action. So if you see someone bouncing out of the bottom into a bicep curl to their armpits and nipples, something's going wrong. So tell them to pause the top, and that'll give you a better eye line of what they're actually doing at the top. And a lot of times we want to row a little bit closer to just mid-abdomen. And then for those bouncy reps, body like a statue. And I'm not totally against the bouncing at the bottom, but there's two things that I would really encourage you to pair the bouncing or cheat reps with. And one would be heavy weight, and two would be a really solid pause at the top. So even if we are kind of cheating a little bit from the bottom, we're still getting a really high quality muscle contraction at the top. And then on that inverted row, a lot like the push-up, which is just sort of like the opposite variation, a lot like the push-up, sloppy core is kind of like the number one thing that I see. So talking to them about bracing the core. Fake range of motion, really similar issues to the bent over row, is maybe throwing their hips around or breaking a neutral spine position to build some momentum from the bottom. And then once they're at the top, then that bar might be coming up to the nipple and armpit region, instead of to the upper abdomen. So we want our controlled range of motion. And again, we're looking at shoulder mobility. A lot of times I will do an inverted row, and because of my shoulder mobility, my back will achieve a full muscular contraction and full range of motion on my backside, but that bar won't be touching my chest. And that's okay. In order to get it there, I would just end up doing a little bit of a bicep curl. If that's what you're looking for, that's all right, but just kind of know your standards and know what you're looking for. So if that bar is coming high to the nipples or the armpits, just have them walk back a little bit and remind them that it's a row, not a curl. On that pull-up, common error would be at kipping or that full body action. So if you're in a CrossFit, I'm not dogging it. All I'm saying is that if we want the pull-up to help us strengthen and grow our lats, then the kipping action is going to hold us back a little bit on that. Now, if you want to do a set of strict reps and then do some kipping at the end to build in to get you up so that you can do a controlled negative, that's a great time to do kipping for strict rep pull-ups. But they're two different things, and beware of kipping reps for a substitution for strict reps. So just talking about having strict legs. So straight legs, or if they are going to bend the knees, just maintain that same angle. Fake range of motion. If you have them pause at the top and squeeze the back, that's going to solve some problems for you. Sloppy core, brace the core. So that pull-up should actually be a little bit like a hollow rock or a hollow hold, where the abdomen, the rectus abdominis, is getting quite a bit of action on the front side of the anterior core throughout that motion, throughout that set. So watch for the sloppy core. So tell them to brace the core. Beware of that hyperextended spine and just the legs. Maybe they bend the legs like kind of like that image on the right. But as they come up, the legs might bow back underneath them. And so instead of doing a vertical pull with their legs bowing and then marching back, they actually end up doing a little bit more of a row, which is fine, but just know your standards and know why you're doing that exercise and what you're attempting to achieve from it. And as far as the pull down, this is a great addition to pull-ups, and it's also a great substitution for pull-ups. And then some common issues here would be that low back extension, sort of like flicking the upper back backwards to get some momentum to get that bar moving downward. Whereas you might just say, hey, body like a statue with robotic arms. So everything's going to be really still, except for you get those robot arms moving. And fake range of motion. Again, so just kind of that flare back when the weight is high. And then as the bar comes downward, instead of getting a muscle contraction in the back and focusing on that, doing a little bit of a bicep curl towards your chin or throat. So remember, we want to say back, not biceps, or just tell them to pull it to the chest. So just know what you're trying to achieve. These are kipping pull-ups are great exercises. Rows, kind of like a hybrid between a pull-up and a row. That's another great exercise. It doesn't have to be purely vertical or purely horizontal. If it's somewhere in between, that's fine too. But just know why you're doing what you're doing, and challenge your athletes to meet your standards. Okay, so when or how are we going to program in these exercises? And we're going to talk about that a little bit on this slide, but this could be, I don't know how many thousands of hours we could talk about this, but we could talk about it for a long time. So Perlpin's chart is based on research that was done regarding weightlifters. So weightlifters doing full body motions such as the snatch, the deadlifts, lower body specific motions like the squat. But it carries over into a lot of the work that we do with an upper body. But you got to think this is an attempt to optimize the stress on the body and the nervous system. And when we do upper body exercises, we stress the nervous system, but nowhere near as much as we do when we're loading the spine for a total body exercise or a lower body specific exercise such as the deadlift or the squat. So a bench press is still going to have a good impact and stress on the central nervous system, but our pull-ups are not going to achieve that. Our push-ups, unless our push-ups are loaded very, very heavily, probably not going to achieve that similar central nervous system stress that takes place during a back squat or a deadlift or a hang clean. So these numbers are a little bit more appropriate for squatting and pulling weights, such as with a hang clean or a deadlift. But it's not a bad place to start with programming for items such as a barbell bench press or a barbell overhead press. As we're doing exercises like pull-ups, where the stress is not loading the spine, it's actually decompressing the spine. And rows, the bent over row is probably going to be a little bit more stressful on the nervous system, but not too much. But if we're doing like a chest supported row, machine row, a dumbbell one arm row, when we're doing those kinds of rows and pulls on the upper body, your central nervous system is not going to be the limiting factor, not from what I've seen. Now, if your grip is getting fried, that's another issue, and we can talk about that in a second, but just keep in mind that our upper back can be challenged and probably given loads quite a bit greater than we can use with upper body pushing and total body exercises and lower body exercises that load the spine. As far as your grip goes, if you're not familiar with the concept of heart rate variability, we're going to dive into that now. So let's grab some markers here. So heart rate variability, or HRV, equals your central nervous system's state. So the state of your central nervous system. HRV is not your beats per minute. Heart rate variability is not your beats per minute. It is the relationship and the consistency of the electrical pattern within the heart during individual beats. So when our HRV is happy, when our central nervous system is in a good position, let's say happy or parasympathetic, so when we're in a parasympathetic state, so that's like rest and digest, or we're able to relax. So think about on a vacation with, drinking a nice big virgin daiquiri out of a coconut or a pineapple or whatever. So when you're just a happy camper and you're feeling good and you got no stress, no worry, then you're going to be much more parasympathetic. And we can actually measure that through your HRV, through your heart rate variability. So when we're happy and parasympathetic, HRV is high. How about when we're stressed, when we are behind at work or getting in fights with our boyfriends or girlfriends, and we're in the middle of a really hard phase of training? That's when stress is high. So we're happy, we're sad, and we're sympathetic. Okay, when we're sad or sympathetic or mad, whatever, just stressed. When we're sad or sympathetic and just stressed, our heart rate variability, And the heart rate variability is the uniqueness of the contract, the contraction of the heart from one beat to the next. When we're sympathetic, we have low HRV, and that can be measured. But a great indicator, and not everybody's going to have measure equipment to be measuring these things, but one thing we can all use is grip strength. We can go hang from a post, hang from a pull-up bar and see how long we can hang, and that's a pretty good indicator of your grip strength. And they found through quite a bit of research that that is really relevant and correlated to your sympathetic state. So if your all-time record for hanging off of a bar is 1 minute, and you hang for a minute and 5 seconds, you're probably in a pretty darn good parasympathetic state. You're not too stressed. You've probably been sleeping good lately. Now, if you go up and you jump up on that bar and you only hang for 30 seconds, you're probably in a pretty lowly sympathetic state. Stressed out, haven't been sleeping, overworked, maybe in like a state of anxiety, something like that. So, we want to strike when the iron is hot. So we know that we can train harder and we can push and dig deeper when we're sympathetic or parasympathetic, excuse me. And we know a lot of times we need to back off when we're more sympathetic. Now, I say all this to say this. We can really challenge the upper back, but a lot of grip work will have a negative impact on our heart rate variability. So if we are doing tremendous amounts of pulling and holding of weights, this can impact our heart rate variability. So that's a big tangent, but that's kind of like a reason why maybe a lot of back work is not going to affect your central nervous system directly, similar to how other exercises are. But if you heard what I said earlier about how we can do a lot of back work and you go crazy on it and you're smoking your grip in your hands all the time, because of this little phenomenon over here, that actually might create a negative state of stress in the body. So everything in moderation, and we'll talk more about periodization and creating forward steps and progressive overload, and when to back off. So we'll talk about that again later in this program, not today, but down the road. So that's a little bit more about Prolapin's chart and the relationship between lower body to upper body, and between upper body, some of your pushing and some of your pulling. So yeah. How about our push-pull ratio? Working at a university, working in commercial gyms, as the smartphone has come out, I see people like this fella in the image in the upper right. I see that body posture nonstop all day. And if you're ever next time you're at a street light, look at the people around you. That is the body posture, is leaning forward, crummy spine organization, vertebrae are all out of alignment. And the same thing in an office setting is that when people start getting that office job and sitting up to their desks, and they start straining towards the screen, and just their spine organization is horrendous. One of the things that we can do to boost shoulder health, spine health, is we can have more pulls than pushes, because our modern world has taken away manual labor. We're no longer baling hay and pulling weeds and pulling crops from the earth that would help boost our upper back work. Now we're texting and driving and sitting in computers. So when we're in the weight room, it's not a bad idea to have way more pulling than pushing, just as a general approach. And then we talked about this a little bit in some of our upper body activity days. I think it was our pull day, but depending on your sport, depending on your population, you may tweak that even more. So, swimmers do a lot of pulling in the water. Their lats are developed. So you might be able to push more with them in the weight room and keep their shoulders happy. Wrestlers are pretty neutral, but they probably do extra push-ups throughout practice and just throughout training. And football players are way more push dominant, especially if they're linemen and it's their job to put their hands on the chest of the opponent and drive them backwards. So kind of knowing your population and knowing what they're going through in different times of year, or just by playing different sports. That's one thing to keep in mind. And just looking to keep shoulder health a high priority. This is going to be one of our biggest danger areas for injury and overuse. I'm not going to read through this, but I do encourage you all to look into Coach Eric Cressy of Cressy Performance. He has helped popularize landmine pressing. He mostly works with baseball players, and shoulder health with baseball players is obviously extremely important. And so going through landmine presses and landmine press variations allows him to build strength in the upper bodies of his athletes while keeping their shoulders healthy. So we may want to consider it for ourselves and for our athletes as well. I'm not going to dive into that too much, but I would just say that this is a pressing variation that I adopted later on after years of doing just barbell and dumbbell variations. And now it is one of my top go-tos. It's great for keeping the shoulder healthy, as well as connecting the upper body work to the core, to the midsection, our core, and down to our legs. So it's a little bit more of an athletic movement, along with being healthier and safer for the shoulder. Coach Joe Franco has written some articles along the lines of West Side for Skinny Bastards. So West Side is a powerlifting organization. West Side Barbell is a powerlifting organization. And Joe DeFranco borrowed some of their principles and ideas and mutated them for basically for the meathead crowd who is not necessarily into extreme powerlifting, but wanted to get more muscular. And so he took that and he wrote an article about it, and it's fairly popular article. And a couple of variations later of that article, he wrote one for kind of like has-been athletes, I think is what it's called. But the idea is that he's allowing and he's freeing up people to spend more time training their upper body than their lower body. And depending on your sport and your goals, that might be a terrible idea, or it might be a pretty good idea. Having worked with general population for years, I can attest that many people do not want to train legs. And so a lot of times you end up, to keep them happy, a lot of times you end up training the upper body more. Now, is that doing what's best for them? Not always. But is it doing what's going to keep them feeling good and paying you money? Sometimes, yes. Do you still make fun of them for not doing enough legs? Absolutely, no question. But I wanted to include Joe DeFranco's thought process and his information on here for two reasons. One is that I want to encourage you all to pursue his writings and listen to his podcasts and watch some of his videos. He's very intelligent. He's very good at doing what he does. He's great at coaching athletes and taking concept principles and simplifying them and making them simple so that you can write them on a napkin and explain them to other people. So I would encourage you all to dive into Coach Joe DeFranco's teachings. He's got some great stuff. And the other reason I want to bring this up is because you got to know your population. You got to think, if I have a 50-year-old female client who wants her arms and back to look better for a wedding that she's going to go to in a few months, if you're going to challenge the legs and squats and things like that, you need to be able to build that connection behind why the legs and total body exercises are important to help the arms or the back look good in like a backless dress or whatever it is. So you need to either be able to build that connection and sell that idea, or you need to kind of meet your client in the middle with what they're already thinking and the truth, which is that lower body training and total body training is going to be extremely beneficial for making the upper back and the arms look good. So sometimes you got to meet them in the middle and sort of collaborate with them a little bit, and that might mean a little bit less lower body training than normal. And what you can do to make up for that is maybe increase the running. So just because they're not squatting doesn't mean they can't run or get on a stationary bicycle and smoke their quads or anything like that. But just if you know why you're doing what you're doing, that will allow you to communicate better to maybe some general population athletes, or to your resident meathead on a team who only wants to do extra biceps and triceps. Meanwhile, they bench press more than they squat and those kinds of things. So you want to help our athletes be athletic, but we also want our clients to be confident in what they're doing for achieving their goals. And sort of playing off of that concept a little bit is that there's an old famous survey, where the Goldman dilemma, where this researcher asked quite a few athletes if they would take a drug that would kill them, but before it killed them, it would make them extremely successful. And the numbers were pretty high, over 50%. And they revisited this survey and kind of saw that maybe it wasn't as clean and clear as everybody thought. So they sort of changed some wording on it and made it extremely clear to athletes about what they were asking. And the numbers are very different. Instead of the low 50 percentile, it's less than 1%. And so that less than 1%, that's kind of what you get when it comes to do anything it takes, mindset athletes. So whether they're on a football team or cheerleading team, or it's just a client in the gym, it's rare that you get the athlete who will do everything and more that you ask. And so it's important that we know why we're asking what we're asking, and that we build the case for the 90 plus percentile of athletes who maybe they just want to come play badminton or ping pong and they don't want to lift weights. So a lot of times lifting weights is something that they have to do so that they can go do what they want to do. Well, as coaches, a lot of times we need to build a bridge between, hey, I know you don't want to be here, but this is why it's productive and helpful. And, you can be a corny guy like me. Obviously I'm super corny, but, you just lay it on thick sometimes and try to make the atmosphere a little bit more fun. But I would advise you to remember to keep the goal. So if their goal is to win a billiards championship, they really don't need to be doing, the heaviest deadlifts on the planet or the heaviest power cleans. You might want to help them get more fit and healthy and feel better. But how much of a 700-pound deadlift would translate over into a billiards competition? Probably not too much. And the same thing with our general population athletes. If we have older individuals coming in, our barbell overhead presses to failure is that can be the most beneficial and safest route. You always look at your risks versus rewards. And so I would say train safely and train appropriately. So keep your goal the goal, but remember that maybe your client's goal when they walked in was they want to lose 15 pounds. It might not necessarily be that they want to overhead press their body weight. And that billiards athlete might want to win a national championship, but they may not really care how much they deadlift. So when we can connect doing smart things to their goal, And that helps us be better coaches and get things done better. But if we can't connect it strongly enough, let's just meet them in the middle a little bit and try to get them to do things a little bit better than they would do without us. And that's our upper body discussion. Just wanted to touch on a few things that we have not yet talked about. And now it's time for everybody to go forth and lift. All right, we'll see you next time.